My name is Jack Lambert. I'm here with Connor Pelletier as part of the Driveline Research and Development Department. And we're going to be going over some research we did using our biomechanics lab to analyze miss distance and biomechanical features. We'll be going through our motivations for this research, the methods we used, previous research that's been done on the topic, and then I'll kick it over to Connor to go over our results. So starting with motivations, I want to kind of look at things through the lens of where we are in command research relative to velocity and the history of velocity training. So in the early era of velocity training, there were lots of questions on if velocity was innate, if it was something that could be trained by pitchers. There were very little weightlifting techniques, a lot of focus on calisthenics, static stretching, and conditioning. And ultimately, this is a result of having no quantifiable objective to measure the velocity of a pitch. We can see here Bob Feller throwing a fastball with a motorcycle going by and making some assumption that it was 150 miles an hour or something like that. We all saw this start to change with the introduction of radar guns and prevalence becoming more common later in the 70s and into the 80s and 90s. So lifting became more prevalent, was something that Nolan Ryan credited to a lot of his success. And there were early weighted ball and biomechanics studies with guys like Tom House and Mike Marshall really pushing the game forward from that perspective. And then to where we are today, it's very common for pitchers to lift and take a more athletic approach to their training. Weighted ball training is almost a standard. And now biomechanical labs are more accessible, like further emphasizing just the amount of analysis we can do in comparing pitchers to each other or analyze what specific mechanics are possible given a guy's current state. So why do we understand velocity training now better than ever? We have the quantifiable objective. We have radar gun to measure velocity in miles per hour. This allows us to test theories, whether it be a weightlifting program or a specific training regimen, and see if velocity is increasing. With Biomechanics Lab, we also understand which positions are favorable for pitchers to get into. This allows us to, compare guys, see what we can potentially improve, and And this has resulted in the position we're in now. These are our Driveline numbers from 2024. As you can see across the board, we saw our average athlete gain velocity. This is not a Driveline specific thing. This trend is clearly reflected across all of baseball. We can see here MLB average fastball velocity is raised by about 2 miles an hour in only 16 years. So the issue in understanding command training is that the quantitative objective is result-based. So we have this example here of bad command and good command. Those labels could even be wrong because we don't know the intention. So if we were to take a result-based objective like walk rate, the assumption is that the pitcher does not want to walk the batter. That's generally true. It's not always true. But then even if we assume it is true, we're leaving out all the intermediate pitches to get there. Okay, so let's take something on a per pitch basis like zone rate. Then the assumption is always that the pitcher is throwing in the zone on purpose or missing the zone is a mistake. But we can see clearly with this example, these are both two-strike curveballs, righty on righty, blue better for the pitcher, red better for the hitter. This pitch with bad command is clearly a better executed pitch. A curveball beneath the zone is more likely to generate a whiff. The curveball hung is technically in the zone, decreasing your chance of a walk, but it's likely going to be hit for damage. All this to say, intention is hard to measure. And with intention being hard to measure, not having a radar gun, this leads us to this point of where command research is. I would not take this graph as gospel. It is some janky Google Scholar querying for throwing training velocity or training throwing velocity, training pitcher command, just some keywords like that. But if we look, we're roughly 20 years behind where we are in velocity training. This is not to say that command does not matter. And to emphasize this, I kind of want to go through a case study real quick. So we have 3 pitchers here, 3 fastballs. Kyle Hendricks, slowest fastball in the league. Yu Darvish, around league average. And Ben Joyce, the hardest thrower in the league. So here we can see 0-2 fastballs versus right-handed hitters. It's very clear that Hendricks can still get it done. He has a much less margin for error. Darvish, a little bit better. And then Joyce can throw basically anywhere other than the heart of the plate and is likely going to see success. So the issue with looking at each of those heat maps, though, is that we have to account for the probabilistic nature of a miss. So with elite command, we still expect major league pitchers to miss by around 9 inches on average. Average command, that's around 11, and bad command is around 13. So anytime a guy is aiming at a given spot, there's a very low chance he hits that exact spot. It's much more likely it's somewhere around that radius, and depending on their command, we can shrink or widen that radius. So take Ben Joyce here. We would say, based on the minimum run value of this heat map, that he should throw this pitch down and away. This does not match any intuition of what pitching coaches have said and what is reflected on the game on the field. You're likely throwing the fastball up in the zone. So if we take this heat map, though, and we give him average miss distance, and we just overlay them running a convolution, we can see that the optimal spot for him to aim is actually the top of the zone. We apply this to all pitchers' stuff and command profiles, or just these 3 examples here. We can see how important both stuff and command are. So for a guy like Kyle Hendricks, if you're throwing 87 in MLB, you better be able to dot it. There is little margin for error if you do not have elite command. If you have bad command and throw 87, that's just all red. Then you have a guy like Darvish, where he may be able to get away with average command, but still good command is ideal. And a guy like Joyce, who bad command is still serviceable. Average command, he's a great player. Elite command, it's unhittable. All this to say, training economy is scarce. If a guy comes in for the offseason, it's very unlikely we're able to address every single flaw or every single thing that can get better in his game. You need to decide what would be the most valuable for you to improve. And the answer is usually moving up on this grid or left on this grid. So finding the best way to spend your time training. And I think a lot of times the answer is command, to kind of make these heat maps more blue without even touching your stuff. So to address this issue, we created the intended zones tracker. So what we do here is we select the specific point in the strike zone or outside the zone that the pitcher should be aiming the ball. We then use TrackMan to track the location of it. And with this, we have quantifiable command. We're measuring in miss distance what we want, how far a guy is missing from his given target. The motivation behind this is that stuff modeling has largely plateaued, and we have seen about the upper bounds of what we're able to explain based only on ball flight characteristics. Subsequently, we've seen stuff-based pitch design being optimized. Pitchers have added from 2021 to 2024 roughly 0.4 to 0.5 pitches per season each season, and this number has only gone up since 2021. Guys are adding new pitches, most of this being stuff motivated. 2 years ago, we saw it with the sweeper. A lot of guys added the new sweeper there. We saw the splitter last year. We've also seen these gyro-y short breaking balls like death balls being much more prevalent. They're reflective of what the stuff models are valuing at a given point in time. But we can increase the value of all of our pitches if we can improve our command. So leading into the methodology of the research we conducted to get a first step of better understanding command and how to train it, the technology we used, the Launchpad, which is our biomechanics lab, does markerless collection on each of the athletes. The intended zones tracker, which is selecting a location and then ultimately using TrackMan to track it. The objective here we're looking for is miss distance in inches. We believe that with an established intention that both the athlete and trainer are aware of beforehand allows miss distance to be an accurate gauge of command. So all the athletes we used were fully on-ramped, meaning they were healthy, ready to throw in a velocity training phase. So in a phase where they should be throwing as hard as they can. Usually they were participating in an A day. It was either A day or velo day, which would be 90% to 100% intensity. And this ended up being a mix of college, independent pros, and affiliate pros. The study design here, to limit the noise, we set all targets to be middle fastballs. We did not want to have to deal with variable locations or variable pitch types at this point in time. I think there's definitely value in that down the line. And we took all data from specific bullpens, which were between 8 and 20 pitches. And when possible, we collected from the same guys week over week. The resulting data here, you can see most athletes had one session. We have 4 or 5 that got over 25 throws there. Missed distances largely between 10 and 20 inches with tailing off to the upper bound there. So we're not the first to perform research like this. We found one study in 2022 on pitching mechanics and the relationship to accuracy in professional baseball pitchers. What they did is they had manual charting of setting an intended location, and then they had, I believe it was 5 people each chart where they think the pitch landed, took the average of that, and then with that, this was about 100 professional pitchers, bucketed them into good, average, and bad command. From this, they did a ANOVA analysis on biomechanical features, ultimately finding that the high accuracy pitchers had lower lead knee flexion at ball release compared to the low accuracy pitchers. The high accuracy pitchers had lower shoulder internal rotation torque compared to the low accuracy pitchers. The high accuracy pitchers had lower elbow varus torque compared to the low accuracy pitchers. And the high accuracy pitchers had lower elbow medial force compared to the low accuracy pitchers. Now Connor's going to take us through what we did and the results we found.
All right, so on to the results. We initially tried to recreate the ANOVA analysis from the prior study with a similar set of features, but we felt like we lacked the sample for any type of meaningful signal. They had 100 athletes, meanwhile, we only had around 30. So we decided to pivot and try to focus in more on this preconceived notion of repeatability you'd often hear around command. If you've been around baseball long enough, you've probably heard a coach say that to have good command, you need to have repeatable mechanics. Or if someone has repeatable mechanics, he probably has good command and therefore has a higher ceiling. This was a sought after trait in athletes for a long time and still is. But it's never answered what needs to be repeatable or what repeatable even really means in this way. So what we did is we took the standard deviations of a large set of biomechanical features for each of these athletes and compared them to the average miss distances to see what the correlations were. The inputs were standard deviations of every angle and angular velocity of every joint in the body at certain key points during the delivery. These key points were peak knee height, foot plant, max external rotation, and ball release. And in the end, we compared all these standard deviations to the average miss distance and got a set of correlations. We saw a good amount of significant correlations here. Specifically, we see that having more variance in your glove shoulder abduction at foot plant usually led to having higher miss distances on average. This makes sense because the glove shoulder, especially at foot plant, is attributed with the front side and the triggering of the rotation after foot plant. So having variation here would likely have a myriad of downstream effects that would adversely affect command. We also see that dorsolateral tilt at foot plant has a significant correlation with miss distance. This also makes sense because this kind of establishes your rotation, your axis of rotation as a pitcher. Any deviation in this would likely deviate your arm angle and your arm slot, and therefore your ball release, and therefore your command. So having extra variance here usually led to having a higher miss distance and worse command. But this only explained a couple of the features. The rest of them seem to suggest that having higher variance was better for command. We interpreted this as suggesting that adjustability is as important, if not more important. But we didn't really see a clear pattern in the features themselves, what they represented, the key points in time. So we decided to take a little bit of a closer look and did some PCA analysis with this data. We broke down our data into 10 principal components that explained over 80% of the variance. Again, you'll see that negative correlations suggest adjustability is important, where you'll have more variance but a lower miss distance. And a positive correlation suggests repeatability is important, where you'll have a high variance and a high miss distance. First, we'll take a look at the feature loadings of our most significant negative component. Here, immediately we see that all of these feature loadings are positive. We see that all the features are velocities, and 14 of the 15 features occur at peak knee height. This suggests that you would want to be repeatable with the way you move throughout your leg lift, so that way you can maybe be more repeatable down the road. Also, we looked at our negative or our positive correlation, and we saw that these feature loadings were a little bit more all over the place, a little bit harder to sift through, no clear pattern, but we did notice that all the features occur after peak knee height. So we wanted to take this another step further and try to more define the relationship between adjustability and repeatability. So we built on a few core premises. One of them being that pitch location is a result of the sequence of positions being the pitch delivery. and that each position in this delivery is a result of the previous positions, and that getting to correct positions by release is necessary. Correct is only determined by the end result of hitting the desired location, and we assume that when a pitcher is out of sync, they need to adjust accordingly to do whatever they can do to get the desired effect, and that is the only thing defining correct in this way. Now, it's worth noting that some positions likely need to be repeatable, but no two throws are ever the same, especially in your elite high velocity pitchers. The throw is just such a quick and violent motion that even just a little bit of variance creeping in there, because we're human, it'll happen, will even then compound later on in the delivery. So this is just something that is the nature of the act itself, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. There's also the Bernstein's hammer study, where all of the most elite blacksmiths that were hitting the same spot on the blade most consistently all had different sets of mechanics to get there on every single swing. So it makes sense that some actions specifically need to be variable to compensate for prior variation and inconsistencies that show up earlier in the delivery. When we connect repeatability and adjustability, order begins to matter. So naturally, our metrics kind of broke out into two categories of funnel in and funnel out. Funnel in meaning that you have a higher variability early and then get to a lower variability state afterwards. You can think of this as having different entry points, but ending up at the same location. And then you have the opposite. You have funnel out, where you start from a low variance state and then have different exit routes and have a higher variability state afterwards. So the metrics we made were basically just ratios of these standard deviations, but we crafted them pretty carefully, where we would take one of the standard deviations and divide it by another standard deviation that happened at the next point in time and at a joint that is above the prior joint in the kinetic chain. This would mean if we're looking at my lead knee flexion at foot plant, we would take the standard deviation of that and then divide it by the standard deviation of my shoulder abduction at max external, or my glove shoulder abduction at max internal, or my torso rotation at max external, so on and so forth. Get all of these valuable combinations. And this helps us break the throw up into three components. Basically, now you have a period from peak knee height to foot plant to max external, and max external to ball release. When getting all of your viable combinations of these standard deviations for each of these three phases, we saw that we had a lot more significance in our correlations and a lot more significant correlations. I'll start with the peak knee height to foot plant metrics. Here, we see that all of these metrics are your quote unquote funnel in variables. They have a lower correlation with a higher dampening score, meaning lower miss distance. This suggests that having high variation at peak knee height and then coming to a lower variance point at foot plant is better for command. Specifically, it's noted that having high variance in the trunk and the pelvis locations at peak knee height to having a low variance in your shoulder internal rotation and shoulder abduction at foot plant matters. You can think of these as your flip up metrics, and these are all at foot plant. These are usually the metrics that lead into the timing of the flip up, which will occur immediately after. It's also worth noting that all of the funnel in features that were significant here came between peak knee height and foot plant. Specifically saying that how you move through your leg lift, your coil, and your drift should be variable so that you can consistently get to the same flip up point at foot plant. What this flip up point is does not really matter. The averages have no correlation with the average miss distance. The standard deviations, though, have a much better correlation, still not significant. But once you add in the context of the consistency of your leg lift, your coil, and your drift, and how adjustable you are there, it gives us a much better explanation to how good you are at actually commanding the baseball. So now we'll take a look at our foot plant to max external metrics. These are all funneling out metrics, and they all involve having a low variability state at foot plant, specifically in your trunk, and then having a high variability in scap retraction at max external rotation. All of them have scap retraction at max external rotation being at a high variance state, being good for command. This makes sense because Scap retraction likely allows for a cleanup of any prior inconsistencies or variation that popped up between foot plant to max external. This allows for that cleanup and correction and compensation, because this is generally the last thing that happens before you reach max external rotation. It also makes sense that having these consistent trunk positions at foot plant limit the need for any corrections or compensations by the scap retraction at max external. Again, think back to your dorsolateral tilt being more consistent and having better command in that way. This just limits the need for any correction by limiting the amount of variance that pops up between foot plant and max external. Again, this average scap retraction did not really matter. The consistency did, suggesting that having a more variable scap retraction likely meant having better command. But again, adding in the context of your prior position explained a lot more of the relationship that we were seeing with miss distance. And now lastly, from max external to ball release, again, we see that all of these variables are funnel out variables, where you want to start from some type of low variability state in your upper body kinematics, and then have a higher variability state in your rate of pronation at ball release specifically. This also kind of makes sense, where pronation is the last part of the throw. This is the last thing the athlete does in the throw, the last thing they can do to impact force or impart force on the baseball. And this will also directly impact how the ball is released, the angle it's released, and therefore where the ball ends up. Now, it's also makes sense that your upper body kinematics at max external rotation need to be consistent, as this is the part of the body from max external to ball release that is moving the most. Everything else, the energy is transferred up the kinetic chain. It is going from the elbow into the hand, and the upper body is really the only thing moving dramatically at this point. Again, you'll notice that the average rate of pronation at the elbow did not actually tell us anything about miss distance. The consistency did, saying that having more variation, being adjustable here, does help you explain miss distance better. But again, adding in the consistency of your upper body kinematic positions makes this relationship that much stronger. And now it's worth noting that all of these funnel out features occur after foot plant, suggesting that if you funnel in to foot plant to get to a low variability state and then funnel out after foot plant, this suggests that you will have pretty good command, if not elite. So all in all, does repeatability matter? Yes, but it doesn't really paint the whole picture. Not at all. So again, perfect repeatability is an impossible goal. You're never going to have two throws that are completely identical on a mechanical level. That's just not reasonable to expect. But it still makes sense that you want to minimize variance, because you want to minimize variance in your outcome. Here we see that you want to minimize variance specifically at foot plant and in your upper body kinetics at max external. And it's known that the best pitchers are the best self-organizers. This is well known in velocity, where oftentimes your hardest throwers are the ones that can make the most of their physiology and their fatigue at any given point and compensate and do what they need to in the best ways. The hardest throwers are known to be the best compensators. And now we see this to be true for command as well. But we also know now that it matters how pitchers compensate. So specifically adjusting in your scap retraction at max external and your rate of pronation into ball release, being adjustable here suggests that you have a good feel for command. So what are our next steps? Well, at least we have our radar gun now. We can get instant quantifiable feedback of how much we missed by on any pitch on any given basis. So now we can turn this around and try to make athletes better in this way. But incorporating this into training is not straightforward. If you were to tell what I just told you to any athlete, they are likely just going to get worse, because this is not actionable information for any athlete. But you have to start somewhere. We view this as a very necessary first step into this field, and that without this, you're not going to get anywhere. So we are going to, in the meantime, we're going to continue to find an external focus that matches the internal demands that we've laid out. But we're going to continue to collect data as well. With the college summer coming up, we hope to get a lot more athletes into our gym. So we're going to continue to put these athletes through these protocols, and we're going to improve our analysis as well. We want to take a bit more of a look into the time series aspect of this data, as well as maybe look more into forces and energetics and things like this. maybe nonlinear modeling as well. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is refine and distill our results to something that's actually digestible and usable by trainers and athletes. So once we can finally get something that's actionable, the real goal here is to, once again, revolutionize how we train baseball pitchers. Thank you.
Good stuff. Good command.
You like
Hey,
that?
boys, two questions. So first off, kind of like my intuitive idea when you lay out the experiment would be to potentially like build a model to predict the the average miss distance, like put in all those biomechanical variables in a model and try to build something out, maybe use pitchers as a fixed effect or something. So did you guys consider that at all, or what was the idea? And then the second part, it'll be a quick one, so you'll be able to remember it. What was the average like fastball velo for the guys in the study?
Yeah, was your first question if we like threw all this into a model to predict? Yeah. So the intention of the study was more to understand the underlying components. So we wanted to keep it isolated from that perspective and kind of see the forest through the trees rather than just like, great, we can predict miss distance. That wasn't really super applicable to us. We did make a pretty simple multilinear regression, just choosing one of the components from each of the 3 phases of the throw that we defined, like peak knee height to foot plant to max external rotation to ball release. And I believe that had like a R squared of 0.75 on the test set. So pretty solid for just using some pretty basic features. And average fastball velo, I believe, was upper 8s. Is it around
Mid upper 8s, yeah. And it was not significantly different. It was mid to upper 8s for the fastball velocity, and it was not significantly different between groups. Okay, is what we noticed.
Cool. Thanks.
Great presentation. You had a lot of stuff, but if you had like a one take home message, like how to improve accuracy, it sounds like you looked a lot at like the foot plant and that had a lot of effect. Would you say that's like analogous to like a pool player setting up for his shot and having the same setup every time? Like, would it be reasonable based on this to say, okay, you have some guys who lack command, put a piece of tape on the mound and have them hit that before they release the ball every time?
Potentially. As far as the pool player comparison, I think that's pretty apt. But it's not necessarily your setup of, the whole delivery, but it is your setup of the rotation part of the delivery, where most of the stuff happens. Once the foot hits the ground, the energy flows up the chain. And if you're in different positions to start that, it makes sense that as the energy flows, it's going to flow in different ways. But I will say that I don't know if I completely can get behind the idea of the tape. I just think that with where it's at right now, there's no getting around the fact that anything you tell an athlete's going to be very internal, and they're going to focus on things that are completely different from putting the ball in the right spot, right? So it's one of those things where you want to implement tools where you can measure their ability to do the things you want them to do, like be adjustable in these certain ways, and give them tools that can help them do that. And what exactly those tools look like right now, we don't know, but that's more the avenue we're looking at.
Yeah, I think too with this, like, I view the most immediate value that can be had rather than the repeatability at foot plant thing. I think that's a good idea that may potentially work. I think leaning into the tools we already have, like Dr. Fleisig's example, used some of the driveline command balls that are oversized a little bit, overweighted. We have some underweighted ones, undersized. I think doing stuff like that will force guys into different variable positions and then allow them to still practice hitting a target. And that was the at least intention behind those being a product, and being able to rigorously test those now, I think, is a valuable first step before getting into the consistency side of things.
Based on some World Series games that I used to watch, your average miss distances seem a little bit on the large side, but it may be the picture that sticks in my mind was just absolutely crazy, unique, and control, okay? But what was the small, two questions tied together. What was, you don't have to tell the guy's name even, that might be proprietary. What was the smallest average miss distance that you all observed in your study? And how many total guys were part of the study?
Yeah.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know what the smallest average miss distance for any singular person was. I'm pretty sure it was,
Our small group had an average of like 10, was that right? Or 9?
yes, when we tried the ANOVA, we bucketed guys by their miss distances, and we saw that the good accuracy group had an average miss distance around 10. But that wasn't a singular guy.
And then 27 guys. in our
Yeah,
study.
and then there was 27 guys in our study, or at least with enough of a sample to qualify for the analysis that we did.
To get Dennis Eckersley to visit your lab.
All right, thank you.